Welcome to the first episode of the behind-the-scenes content for Wonder Woman Spirit of Truth, presented by Don't Sue Us Please. I'm Josh, the composer and sound designer for all of the content you hear on Don't Sue Us Please. We're currently working on the production for our next series releasing at the end of the summer. But in the meantime, we have a bunch of behind-the-scenes content for you to listen to. This episode is a panel discussion with our creative team, talking about everything to do with Wonder Woman Spirit of Truth. That is, as long as we can stay on track. We are, listeners, a pretty hyperactive group of people. We don't really stay on track, and there's a lot of content to cover. So I will be your narrator through this whole thing as we cut and jump around to get to the really good parts. I would also like to add that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, our New York City-based production team is currently in 4 different states, meaning we had to record this with limited equipment and over Zoom. Meaning that our normal quality of our episodes may not be perfect for these interviews, but we're working on solutions. Sit back and enjoy stories about how we met, why 5 nerds are making fanfiction about superheroes, our deep love for Animal Crossing, and just a lot of making fun of each other. And don't worry, we'll have another cinematic journey for your ears ready by the end of the summer. Also, just a quick plug for our social media. Go follow us on all social media platforms at the Superhero Podcast. Finally, all of this content wouldn't be possible without listeners like you supporting us on Patreon. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/the Superhero Podcast. Now, enjoy the episode.
There's Jackie the Joke Man Martling, who left the show.
That's Nora.
That's
Nora
me,
is Jackie
I'd like
Joke.
to leave this show.
Nora, Joke
we
Man
love
Martin.
you.
Should we start an intro now?
We should. We
we
totally
should.
Nora,
All
I feel
right.
like this
You
is
want to
your-
introduce
somebody-
us?
This is
Yeah.
Nora, you're doing the thing. After you.
Okay. Well, here we are. Don't Sue Us Please, also known as DSUP, the Superhero Podcast. I'm Nora. I'm your host and creative producer.
My name is Matthew Klein. I am your co-writer of Wonder Woman. I'm the writer of the good parts of Wonder Woman Spirit of
Ooh,
Truth.
got him. Ooh, got him. Yeah.
My name is John. I am apparently the writer of the bad parts as well as
The better parts.
Well, thank you.
Parts that aren't good.
In
Whatever
my
that
spare
means.
time, I am Julie, your cruise director.
Ooh.
Oh, wow.
Deep cut.
I like that.
I am Kelly. I am the showrunner as well as the director for the episodes.
And I'm Josh. I'm the sound designer and composer, resident beat boop maker, awkward person.
Resident beat. Could you please get a card that actually this is Josh, resident beat boop maker?
But I feel
I'm
like
already on
it should be
Vistaprint
like
right now.
But I
gonna
want it to
happen.
be like pressure sensitive, so when you squeeze it, it
Oh
actually
yes, so
makes
that it
like
goes
a beep
beep
boop
boop.
sound.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Well,
it's in the budget.
It's probably not, but God.
Currently on our mock-up website that will be coming soon, hopefully, it does say Josh, he makes the beat boop shit.
I like that.
Okay.
I mean, it's really.
I owe
it's-
you a bio, don't I? Damn it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh,
Dude.
I thought about that in the
This
shower
is
today.
really
It didn't
why
happen.
Nora. This is really
God,
why Nora
Nora,
wanted to
I'm
gather
so
us all
sorry.
together.
Holy crap.
I brought you to meet
This is
today.
this is a reverse intervention.
There
It's
it
one
is.
person
The cold
lecturing
open.
the
All
other
of us
four.
apologizing to Nora.
Nora,
All of us
every
going,
time.
"Oh,
So
Is that what
sorry,
you're-
Nora.
Oh my
my
God,
God.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I was thinking about this last night, and I was like, wow, well, if any of the 4 of them, well, not John, if the other 3 go missing, it was 100% me, and they 100% deserved it. So. Just want it noted on the record. I killed you, and you definitely deserved it.
Okay.
So should we tell the people that we have a podcast? We do a thing.
We
Oh,
do-
right.
We
Yes,
have a
we do a thing,
podcast.
huh? Yeah. Nora, you should probably talk about that, huh?
Well, I did say that we are Don't Sue Us Please. the Superhero Podcast. You can find us on all platforms as at the Superhero Podcast. We are on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts,
Google
all
Podcast.
of the things.
Google. Don't forget Google.
Don't forget
We are on the Google.
All hail the Google.
All
and
hail the
as my
glow
grandma
cloud.
says, the internet. Did you use the internet?
I put it on the Google. Yes.
I put it on the
internet? What?
Can I
How
get
else
it?
would we get it out there, Nora?
Yeah,
if we
she's
didn't-
like, can you get it through the internet? Like, yes, you can get all of the things through the internet.
Why
Yes.
hello
the
there.
things.
I run an internet
All the
show.
things.
You know what you can't
Yep.
get to the internet?
What?
A hug.
Oh.
They're working on
Wow. Wow.
that, especially
John,
during these times.
John, I heart you.
Well, I thought maybe I would give us a love segue into
Yeah,
Wonder Woman.
Ooh.
Oh,
Yeah.
See,
Oh.
John's the only one.
Such a
John
vibe.
is the only one that's
John's on
thinking like
track.
we actually going to talk about
Yeah.
this.
He's got it going.
So if
He's
you
got
don't
it
know-
really
All right.
going.
We make a podcast that's a storytelling podcast about your favorite superheroes, and the first season was Wonder Woman. And
Spirit of Truth.
Spirit of Truth. And it was written.
It's a cinematic journey for your ears.
Yes,
That's
it
my
is.
tagline.
I was really proud of that one.
That's pretty good.
that was a
man.
good one.
That's
That was
good.
That is a
All
great tagline.
So yeah, since, as Josh was saying, since Matthew, you and John are the co-writers, it starts with you guys. Tell us about
Well, it was a dark and stormy night.
Mm.
Good
Well,
opening.
it really
Good opening.
came out, John. I'm trying to remember. This was what, maybe 4 years ago? Was it 5 years ago that we started writing this spec script for a Wonder Woman screenplay? So we were going over this idea. We'd been, we had these, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed aspirations for kind of creating a great Wonder Woman spec script, and I would only been doing playwriting up until that point. That's really where my training is, in prose and playwriting. And John, I knew as a writer as well, and we had been working together at Forbidden Planet in Manhattan, which is a comic book shop. So John and I would see each other, multiple days a week, and we talk comics, and I knew his love of Wonder Woman. And I had not really become a big Wonder Woman fan yet. That was actually, John was my Amazon Sherpa, as it were, into
John's
this
a fan
realm.
of Wonder Woman.
Amazon Sherpa.
My Amazon Sherpa. And so I remember we talked about it, I feel like, at various points, like what we were working on. And we just had this idea on shift one point, like we should do a superhero script and we should do a Wonder Woman script. Why not? They haven't made a Wonder Woman movie yet. And so I think
so. It hadn't been announced in planning or anything.
No, it was in development, but I don't think they'd really, like, it had been in development for years at that point. John, am I wrong?
So I think, if I remember correctly, in my
Yeah.
advanced years, what had happened was not in development, and these two guys had written a script and posted it online, and DC bought it because they didn't want it out there. And I think they ended up
right.
using some elements from it.
Wow.
And I think
so
at
we
that
had the
point,
harebrained scheme that we could be the next two guys.
yeah,
You're just going to build the movie off of like postings online over the course of a decade.
was gonna say, then you did it
Crazier
again with
things
the
have happened in
podcast.
Hollywood. Crazier things have happened in
Honestly,
Hollywood.
worst movies have been made.
Oh,
Exactly.
no question. But I like that strategy of like, we'll just let people post shit. We'll buy it and then we'll take the good stuff.
Honestly.
I'm certain that's
our goal, our real goal in life is just to sell out.
Yeah.
And so
Everybody's is.
we thought that this would be, one, really fun. Two, it would give us a project to focus on. Three, we had never worked together before. And four, we really enjoyed each other's company and thought that maybe we wouldn't kill each other in the process, because when you're working with someone new, when you haven't, like, them in one respect, but not in a creative field or not as collaborators, there's always a little bit of that question mark. Like, all right, I think you're not crazy. But when you get into like, what's the workflow going to be at this point now of like, all right, you and I are both coming up with the voices for these characters. You and I are both going to. So we set up a process where we were like, all right, we're going to co-write it all together. Like, we'll sit in the same space. I did most of the typing. John would dictate. And it was really fun we knew we were going to do a take on the origin stories. I think the Gail Simone written animated feature had come out recently. We were both big fans of it, right, John?
Yeah. That one had been out, and I think, oh gosh, you know what?
What?
It actually might be even further back because, because we incorporated part of the Brian Azzarello run, and that was 2012.
That was, but I feel like we were more than a year into that run.
Okay,
so I still think
right.
I don't want to date us anymore, John. Damn it.
Well,
Oh boy, listeners. This is the first time we got off track. We started making fun of Matthew, John, and Kelly for being old, and the joke itself got quite old, so I'm going to save you from it and cut around it. We're going to launch into the next bit now.
And I remember John and I were like watching it independently and talking about it at work, and we were just like, we could do the origin story for Wonder Woman. Like, we know enough. John is an encyclopedia of Wonder Woman, from comics through the Linda Carter show. Even you've watched what was her name from the 70s who did the really bad one off?
Oh, the Kathy Lee Crosby? Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I've watched it a lot.
Oh, he's watched it.
Yeah.
So we thought to ourselves, like, this would be a really fun opportunity. We get to kind of pay homage. We do this kind of fanfic thing. It's on spec. We put it out there. Hey, maybe somebody would want it, right? Who knows? Crazier things have happened. But as much as anything else, it was just a way to get going. So we did.
We all know that it did not become the movie.
No, so your ambitions failed miserably. What did you do?
Miserably?
I'm trying to move us to, so how did it become a podcast?
Kelly Johnson.
Yep, here it is again. We got off track. We started making fun of Nora for actually trying to do her job, which was probably a little unwarranted. We're going to jump back in now to how the podcast actually got started and got rolling for real.
But I love that, like, so after you failed miserably.
After we failed miserably because they greenlit the movie and it went into development.
I quit.
John and I just simply notice I'm ignoring the quitting.
Had you finished the script?
Oh, yeah. Remember, we had finished the screenplay.
No. But I mean, like, when they announced, did they announce while you were still in the middle of writing it, or was it announced like right after you finished it? Do you remember?
I feel like we were actually like in the middle of writing it when we saw the news.
Okay,
somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, we were somewhere in the middle. We were around like Act 2.
Yeah, we ended up having a sit-down reading with some actors that Matthew knew, and some friends from the comic book store from Forbidden Planet came to listen to it.
And it went great.
Yeah.
Tremendous.
Oh, that's cool. Good.
It was a tremendous reading. And then it was like, okay, our dreams are now quashed. And then fast forward a couple years, Kelly, you had come into the fold with Love Drunk and with, at that point in time, 6-Part Productions.
Yes.
Wow.
Which
was our production company before Rain or Shine Productions. Shout out to Rain or Shine. That is the executive producers essentially for Don't Sue Us, Please.
Yep.
And I told you about the script and I'd sent it to you.
Yep.
And that's when you made the realization of like, hey, you should make a podcast.
Because I remember the thing is, I remember talking to you specifically about it, Matthew, and saying it was a shame. It was a shame that DC wouldn't get to see it, or that Warner Brothers wouldn't get to see it, because it was a really good script. And I don't think at that point the Wonder Woman had dropped yet. Like, I think I read it prior to the release. And so I was like, this is great. It's a shame. And so my question I remember was, so what do you want to, what can you do with it? And of course it was like, well, what can you do? You can't submit it, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, well, what if you turn it into, I've been listening to a lot of a podcast called The Thrilling Adventure Hour, which is, it's still pretty big, even though they no longer release regularly. They've been doing, like, during the pandemic, they've been doing one-off benefit performances live, like over Zoom.
Shout out to fellow Philly boy Hal Lublin, great guy.
Yeah,
got to meet him a couple times. Lovely. Been on his podcast.
All those people, like some of my favorite performers in the world, Paul F. Tompkins and Paget Brewster and Mark Evan Jackson and Hal Lublin, and on and on and on. And so I've been listening to it, but they do the guys that write it, Acker and Blacker. It's styled as they've got a particular phrase. I can't remember it exactly, but it's basically old time style performance, but in a new format, right? So it used to be live, like they performed live in LA for an audience, and then they would release it as a podcast. But I've been listening to these stories, and they were all based off old radio style things. So there's like Sparks, Nevada, Marshall on Mars, and sometimes it would have a joining arc, and sometimes they were standalones. And so I was saying to Matthew, like, hell, it works for them. Why not do a radio drama style podcast? So he went back to John. This is the way I recall it. He went back to John and said, what do you think? And they said, okay. And so we started figuring out where to break the script, like how many episodes, and we decided it would be 4, and then where those would have to go. And I remember the biggest challenge was the beginning of Act 2 is Diana's the fight in the Amazons, the competition to become the ambassador to the rest of the world. And there were several pages dedicated.
It was a lot of action. It was a lot of like really kick-ass cinematic, battles.
It was this amazing, like you just watch Diana like just kick ass on the field and do really well, and then it was like, well, guys, that's got to go. We can't do that.
In my head right now, I'm like spinning about like, how would I do that?
Oh yeah,
Josh, you think that's bad? We also had a massive multi-thousand person battle for the climax.
Yeah,
at the end of
it. Yeah, it was incredible.
That last fight scene almost killed me.
Yeah, and like so.
Like 5 people.
Yeah, there's like 3 people involved in that.
Yeah, no. This one was literally an army of the undead soldiers versus the Amazons.
God, I remember that.
It was
so good,
really epic,
so good.
Totally,
but again,
it would be really cool.
Feature.
It's all visual. Like it was written for the movie, so it's all this visual medium. And so the biggest challenge, I remember, the first hurdle was just figuring out how to take the same story that you guys had written and now convert it so that it was an audio only, presentation.
Well, it was a great exercise too, because as a writer, you have to always keep fact that there's a difference between plot and story, right? The climactic battle of zombie army versus, the Air Force, that is technically a plot point. The story point is this is the end of the journey where the world gets to see Diana become Wonder Woman, become the hero.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, it's very easy sometimes to get in your head when you're getting those kinds of notes from a creative standpoint of like, oh, shoot, I really love that part. I can't let it go. How do I change it? And then to Kelly's point, what he's so great at is breaking down story and understanding that, okay, this is actually what it's doing for the story, for the character arc. So once you layered that on, once you figure out the story beat, changing the plot point became a little easier for us, quite frankly.
Good. Yay. Good. John, how was it for you? I mean, like, again, it's a hell of a medium switch. Like, what was it like doing the rewrite?
So I, in my advanced years, had not listened to a lot of podcasts at that point. So just the idea, I'm sure Matthew was close to killing me because there were a lot of times where he would just look at me and go, John, it's audio. They cannot see things. So there were a lot of things where I think we kind of, at one point, I think very early on, Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think very early on at one point, we thought, how are we going to describe this action? Well, maybe it's a newscaster. And there was just a whole lot of trying to figure out because when you're in the middle of a fight, you're not narrating the fight.
Right.
You're not saying, and now I'm going
I don't know how you guys are fighting.
I mean, John's trained in MMA. I don't know how to fight.
This is probably why I keep losing fights. I've been narrating the whole time.
Yeah, it's like they're like, and he's leading with the left.
Yeah, delivering just like shocking color commentary. Wow, just
down goes Nora.
Yeah.
Down goes
she's
Nora.
down.
The battle
She's
just happens to be in
a
a boxing ring. That just happens to be like,
No, but it was a new muscle to learn, right? Because John and I had never written really audio plays before. And so not only are you writing an audio play, but you're adapting a screenplay. So it's a new skill set on top of a new skill set.
So
and that
I-
became some of the fun of it.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I went back and listened to a ton of The Shadow,
I did, yeah.
so I could try to figure out how are they doing it? How are they
Mhm.
making it
I
seem?
remember I'd found The Shadow, and I actually found some of the old Superman ones from like the 40s,
Mm.
and used that. But then I also realized that is not the style we're going for,
But
which
but
became a whole other ballgame.
it does
but it gives you that
ground
basis
from it. Yeah.
Yeah, it gives you a basis to kind of jump off of.
It's funny. I was talking the other day to actually to my wife, and I was
You talked to your wife?
just
Good for you.
just the other day.
Wow.
Just,
Okay.
that's it.
Cool.
That's it. Married 7 years, one conversation.
Beautiful.
No, we were talking, and I realized that because initially I was thinking I didn't really listen to The Shadow growing up. I mean, I'd listened to it, and I actually had a cassette recording because I'm old enough that there were times when cassettes were the thing. There you go, John. A little tip of the hat for you.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. But I had a
What's
cassette.
a cassette?
Yeah, thank you, Nora.
Yeah.
I had a cassette recording of the H.G. Wells broadcast of War of the Worlds, which I had listened to. But then as I got to thinking about it, I had all of these LPs. Like I was surprised when I really started thinking about it. There were all story that were just this. I had an LP of Superman stories. There were like 4 stories. I had one of Bugs Bunny. I had one of Popeye. I had one of Star Trek. There was an album that came out called The Story of Star Wars, which was literally just the soundtrack from the movie, intercut a couple of places with a narrator, which to this day is the reason I can quote all of Star Wars because I listened to it so many times, right?
Yeah.
But I realized that I grew up listening to these stories over a phonograph, over a Victrola, with the big speaking
Wow,
horn.
we've lost Nora.
Nora's like,
Sorry,
I don't even
I'm
know what that is. She just I Bidened on her. I'm sorry.
That's true.
I
You
apologize.
really did.
No,
Malarkey.
sorry, I'm in the garage.
Wow.
That's
She,
okay.
we,
The car's
Wow.
not
we
running,
lost her with
right?
this
That's-
one.
You're okay.
I would not have realized if you hadn't said it, but cool. But I realized that from listening to from listening to all these LPs and whatnot, that I had grown accustomed to the rules of audio drama, and just like for you guys with writing, because as a director, normally I'm used to, Matthew, you're a playwright, I'm a stage director, and I'm used to dealing with a visual medium. And so when we got Josh on board, and Josh and I started building the world, and I say Josh built the damn world. I just made commentary about it. But
Nah, we
but
built the
there were
world.
things like, do you remember, Josh, there was a thing where there was a plane landing, and I was like,
Yeah.
it has to have this sound.
It didn't have the wheel
Because
sound.
that
yeah.
is the sound of a plane landing. And I was started wondering, like, how do I know this? And I'm like, because over time listening to stuff, but also absorbing from TV and movies,
Yeah.
there's a soundtrack that is an expectation.
Well, and it's really
Um,
interesting for me. I was thinking from like the technical stuff when I started working on this, especially like you think about all of my experience and all of my writing stuff either comes from like writing like pop music stuff and classical music stuff, and like film stuff, not like this sort of, I think all of us have come from the same world of like everything we've done is vaguely visual based.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a whole thing in like transitions with music and movies is like the big parts of the music come in like visual transitions. So
Right.
like when there's like a scene change or like a change in perspective or something, that's when you get your big musical moments.
Right.
Right. And we aren't really afforded that necessarily. There were a couple times like I started to figure out how to do it in the final episode where like, I can actually like make it sound like there's some motion going on, and like you can hear somebody moving and nobody's talking, but things sort of shift and move, and you're like, oh, something's changing. And while that's changing, the music can spin, and you're like, oh, I have a transition now, which is like similar to how they do it in like visual media. But it's so weird in like, especially when I was working on like the first 2 episodes, you sort of have to figure out where everything goes. And it's a amazingly well written thing to be like, oh, this goes here, this goes here, this goes here, this goes here, and then you'll sit here and be like, okay, we're in a cave, so there's some echo here, like that makes sense, and like that's a really easy one. Or like we're in the jungle, and like, oh, there's like some jungle birds and like some insect sounds and stuff like that. And then it will be like, we're in a living room, and you're like, is it just really quiet? Like, nobody will know we're in a living room. We're just in a void. Like, all of a sudden, like, my goal is to like, it's interesting because it's a podcast, but I didn't want it to sound like a podcast. Like, you know, like what we're doing now, where we're just a bunch of people talking at each other in rooms.
Right.
You want to have like direction, which is really interesting because even though it's an adapted screenplay and like it's meant for radio, there's still like direction. There's layers to it.
Which is very cool. Yeah.
How much research do you do in terms of, like you just said, tropical birds or, you know, if you're in a rainforest, certain insects, do you actually go into like, well, this is the kind of insect you'd find here to any extent? Or you just kind of like bug noises? Like, what is that level of detail you get into with that?
I will do research down to like the region. So like the hemisphere. So like if you're in the Amazon, you're in like a Southern American rainforest, like there are different bird calls and there are slightly different insects and stuff like that. It's a little hard to discern, but like if you hear it, you hear it. I mean, it's kind of cool, but like I do a lot of research, but not like a crazy amount, like enough to be like, okay, this is where we are, and like these are real sounds of an Air Force base. Like this is like an actual, like the jet when Stephen Trevor's like, that's an F-14 fighter jet. That engine sound is an actual recorded F-14 fighter jet. Like they are very like, there are some concessions here and there you have to make for sounds that you don't have. And like,
but we're not going to like hear a snow leopard in the Amazon.
No.
Cool.
Would you know, Nora? Would you be able to tell?
I am an expert on snow leopards.
Okay. All right. Good to know.
That's called yes and.
We're an offshoot of Tiger King now because Nora is an expert on the snow leopard.
Yeah, John Exotic.
Oh my God. We've done it.
John Exotic.
We've done it.
I would watch that show, for the record. I would absolutely watch that show.
We're canceling all this superhero shit. We're done.
Yeah, screw this stuff. We're doing.
Well, I am curious, Josh, when you know, because we went through several sound designers over the years to try and figure this out.
Yes, we
and
did.
You really seemed to take to the idea of the cinema for your ears. But I'm just curious, what was it for you that kind of struck you when you first read the scripts and you heard about this project when Kelly and I pitched you a bit?
And to be fair, and Nora, because Nora, you're the one that said,
yes. Nora
said,
brought
hey,
in a crowded diner in Midtown Manhattan.
I know this pair of idiots
on the subway, and I texted Josh, and I was like, "So I have a question."
That's true. I was there.
Like,
I remember that. Yeah.
He was like, "Oh God!"
She's like, "This guy is so great." If it had been Swingers, she'd have been like, "He's so money. He's so money, baby. You're gonna love him.
He's so money." And I was like, "So Josh, there's this thing. I want you to do this thing." And he was like, "Oh God, what am I getting roped into?" And I was like, "Well, here's the premise." And like, I know the Kelly dude. Kelly's great. Don't know this Matthew guy. Don't know anything about superheroes really. But I have this idea for you. And explained it. And he goes, well, out of the top 3 things you could ask me, this was definitely one of them. So I'm still waiting to find out what the other 2 are.
Well, I was really
expecting the top 3.
One was taking a snow leopard to the Amazon.
That's a good one.
For the record.
I was really expecting
which we did for this podcast.
We did. I was really expecting like we have this meeting for donors for our alma mater or something like that. Something that I was like, oh, networking events. Oh no. And then she was like, no, I have a job for you. And I was like,
yeah, Josh gets roped into a lot of networking events.
I do.
Also,
it's like a 95% chance. Yeah, we got one next week. Like there's a 95% chance that that's what it's going to be.
Sure.
Now it's like a 99% chance text for Animal Crossing and then like a 1% work chance. Like, but
I still have not played this game.
It's so good.
You guys have to get on it. I'm obsessed. All of my trees are color coded. I'm way too into it. I make it stressful for Josh. We go unlock the quest.
My island is asymmetric. Like Nora's island is all like symmetrical trees and like everything's colored. Mine's like there's some trees, there's flowers. It's like it doesn't really make much sense.
At this moment, listeners, John's audio briefly stopped recording.
But what I would like you to imagine is him shouting and waving his arms around in confusion because he does not know what Animal Crossing is.
I've been telling my so I've been taking care of my grandma during a lot of this, and I've been explaining it to my grandma. She's like seen my island and everything, and at some point she goes, "So Josh, like she knows about the podcast. She knows Josh and I went to college together. So she's like, so Josh, you guys play this a lot, and you're always on the phone with Josh. Does Josh's island look like yours?" And I was like, no. So this is where we get into like the different jobs in this podcast. Josh is very clearly the sound designer guy. He puts random shit. He's like so into like the aesthetic. He's like, there's a fossil here, and like there's like all this shit everywhere. And I'm like, no. You have to have all your trees lined up so you can more effectively collect your items and go make money.
Mine's like it looks nice.
Hands down how it goes. You gotta like
it's rustic.
Really, it's about efficiency.
Basically, what we've figured out is that you're actually Josh's financial planner.
This is, I mean,
actually,
his manager.
Yeah.
Clearly his manager, because all the gigs seem to be coming straight from
Nora.
You need to start like charging at least 5-10% on this.
Bring us back
That's in
around.
our next contract.
To bring us back around, yes.
Yeah, we'll bring us back around this time. What intrigued me about it was I was really interested to see. I had never heard of a format like that. So like a movie for your ears. There's superhero podcasts that exist. People tell stories about them, and like Marvel does one that's Logan, which is sort of on the spectrum of like how far it goes into a movie for your ears. It's very much more like old school radio play though. If you guys have heard the Wolverine one, like it's very much like, and then Logan like heard a car on his left, and then on the left like you hear like a standard car approach, and like you're like, okay, cool.
They have like a new one coming out, right? Marvel. They're doing Marvels.
I don't know.
They're doing the adaptation of the graphic novel Marvels, which I have to admit I like that story arc, so I'm curious to hear how that goes. But sorry,
oh, you're good. What intrigued me about it? So I really liked the concept in the first place. Like, oh, this could, like, I've never heard of something like that before. And at the time, I had been learning about all of this like binaural stuff about how you can like immerse somebody in the sound of the thing. So that was like the first thought that came to my mind when like we met that first time. I was like, well, people have been hyping up like in my circles of people like this sort of 3D audio sort of like you can really be in this scene for something. And like when I had first heard about it, when people talk about it, I was kind of like, is that even useful? Like it really, I mean, it's cool, but like what can you use it for? And then you guys brought this up and I was like, you can use it for that. And
I mean, I still remember the first time you let me hear, Josh, you had done some of the sound design, and it was the first scene.
Was it the jet?
And it was the jet coming from behind over my right shoulder and flying over over to the left.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is the coolest damn thing I have ever heard. Like, I mean, I knew you could shift from side to side in stereo, but it was so clearly on it's
behind you.
Yeah. That was amazing.
I'm not to our next series, which is still unannounced, but I will mention as a little teaser, I did it again with a horse and carriage.
Overhead, they go over.
They go over. No,
yeah.
They zip.
Yeah.
It's a nice big transition. They like a horse and carriage like rips in front of you from one side to the other. It's cool.
Nice. That's very cool.
And one of the things that's really neat too about this whole project, and just I had mentioned before that we've gone through multiple sound designers. Like this project, we have a second series in the work. We have re-recorded Wonder Woman with the actors, I think maybe 3 times in total. We did it, I think, did we do it once for the second series or was it twice?
We did it only once for the second
only
series.
One. We learned a little bit. And John and I have been plotting out multiple years worth of seasons, it feels like, through different iterations on this forever. And then it's really been incredible to kind of, hey, it's all happening now. It's actually like working. And it's been one of those things where I'll be honest, for a couple of years, I was like, this is never going to happen. It's one of those, like, it's been on the back burner. It's like, Josh, until you turned in the first full cut of episode 1, I still wasn't sure this was ever actually going to see the light of day.
To be fair, To be fair, actually, I should note that the 7 o'clock cheer has been happening. So if you pick up the audio off my phone, Josh, it is certainly good. You're going to get the neighborhood yelling in the background.
If we take You've been listening to the first episode of the behind-the-scenes content for Wonder Woman Spirit of Truth, presented by Don't Sue Us Please. If you like this kind of content and want to help support us, go find us on Patreon at patreon.com/the Superhero Podcast. We're going to start posting even more fun content like this pretty regularly over there, so go give it a look. Finally, go follow us on social media. We're on all platforms as @the Superhero Podcast. Thanks for listening.